Almost exactly 30 years ago, Slovenians created our own country. A year beforehand, we had won the multi-party elections. In that period of time, 90% of the voters at the referendum supported the dreams of an independent country. Only once more in history, such a large number of our citizens endorsed a specific decision, and that was the decision to enter the European Union. Being part of the European Union for us Slovenians never represented just an economic opportunity. It signified a return to a family that is connected by the values such as the respect of human rights and fundamental political freedoms and democracy. All that which was taken away in the communist Yugoslavia, or it was breached. And this return to Europe coincided with the fundamental historical mission of the European Union that was dictated by the fall of the totalitarian communist regimes in Europe. We wanted to create a complete, free Europe that will be at peace with itself and with its neighborhood. Today, the European Union is considerably different than it had been when we entered it. It is different than it was when we assumed the presidency of the EU Council and back then the European Council as well for the first time. We can say that that presidency that took place in the first half of 2008 was the last presidency that has not been marked in one way or another by crisis. They came one after another: financial crisis, migration crisis, the occupation of the Crimea, creation of frozen conflicts in our eastern neighborhood, Brexit, then the coronavirus pandemic. During crisis, the European Union was forced to respond to these crises, and we tried to mitigate the crisis as quickly as possible. We strongly hope that during this 6 months, the time shall come when the European Union can and must start functioning in a more strategic and long-term manner. We have to focus into achieving goals that was set by the founding fathers. Europe, free, at peace with itself, complete and comprehensive, at peace with its neighbors. Slovenia is taking the helm of the EU for the second time since its membership in the EU. We will round up the work of the trio in which we cooperated with Germany and Portugal. We will present initiatives and activities, and at the very beginning of the work of the trio, we had contributed to this process. We would like to thank Germany and Portugal for a job extremely well done during very difficult circumstances. For the second half of the year, I can say that we are facing some of the challenges and priorities that stem from the situation in which the European Union finds itself right now. At the same time, we believe that these challenges will contribute to the survival and the development of the Union. First of all, we have to focus on resilience, on recovery of the EU, and on establishing a strategic autonomy of the Union. So we have to shape or complement plans and instruments that will help us strengthen resilience of the Union to pandemics and cyber and asymmetric attacks. We are pleased that the recovery had been planned in such a way that it is focused on reforms. We will be recovering at the same time as we will be implementing the digital and green transition. The next priority is the union of the European way of life, of the rule of law, and of equal criteria and measures for all countries and citizens in member states of the European Union. We are also talking about the union of balanced rights and responsibilities, the union where we provide a high level of protection of human rights, fundamental freedoms, including the freedom of expression. Then we have to focus on creating a credible and secure European Union, a union that is capable of providing security not only within its territory, but within its neighborhood as well. There is also a question of a good cooperation with the North Atlantic Alliance. How to establish good cooperation within the alliance. Most member states of the Union are members of NATO. Next, we have to further our values into our neighborhood as well. We have to, of course, protect external borders and make a clear delineation between legal and illegal migration. We have already started working on the conference on the future of Europe. Well, first we have to set up the conference, start talking about the future of Europe. We will be debating the future of Europe as a continent as well. What we would like to achieve is that we focus as many debates as possible in the next 6 months, debates that will be open to everybody who is willing to contribute their contributions for the shaping of the common European future. We are talking about a common European future. Therefore, we are all called upon to participate in these discussions without making anybody feel like they are called upon or elected to dictate or teach others about Europe or the future of Europe. What we have to focus on is guaranteeing fair and equal discussions so that everybody can share their views on the future of Europe. We have a good basis for this discussion. This basis is represented by the applicable treaties. However, within this context, all viewpoints are welcome, even though they are not unified or going in the same direction, because all of the opinions are welcome. I would like to stress just a couple of key elements because I cannot focus on everything. I will start with the challenge that is still facing us, that is the COVID-19 pandemics. The consequences of this crisis are seen, felt, and visible even here in this room because we are wearing masks. We are asking ourselves what will happen in the next weeks and months, because it is inevitable that the Delta variant will contribute to a spike in infections. Who knows what awaits us? We are very cautiously observing a significantly lesser pressure caused by the pandemic. We are slowly witnessing the opening of the public life. However, we are also focusing on being prepared for the potential fourth wave. We don't want this potential fourth wave, to bring along such trials, tests, and challenges as in the past year, in the fall. The European vaccination strategy is working. It is bringing results. For the future, if we want to be more optimistic, we need to focus on an enhanced vaccination. We have to make sure that a large majority of our citizens becomes ready to be vaccinated. We shouldn't wait for other people to get vaccinated in order for us to reach a significant vaccination coverage rate. All have to contribute to it. But the key question is, how can we convince our fellow citizens that every person who gets vaccinated contributes to us living normally in the future, everywhere in Europe? Because as we have seen, virus does not know any border, so this is our common challenges. Despite this virus, I think that we can live more normally, or expect to start living more normally during the summer and in the fall, is the European COVID certificate. This will help us, and I am very pleased that the institutions have made such a quick agreement regarding this COVID certificate. because the European Union can thus help member states who are competent for this specific area in Europe, because this COVID certificate will help us organize things in a more free way that we could have been able to do that without the certificate. So if our first short-term priority is to do whatever we possibly can to prevent the fourth wave to crop up, because a fourth wave will again stop life in Europe, we have to make sure that in the next 6 months we slowly return to normalcy, to the times that we had before the outbreak of the pandemic, even though some measures will have to remain in place for a little more time. Resilience, recovery, and strategic autonomy of the European Union. These are priorities regardless of who is at the helm of the European Union. We have to be vigilant, we have to stay focused, we have to work in a coordinated manner. We are facing an important task, an important challenge, namely how to make sure that recovery happens, how to make sure that the European Union becomes more resilient and better prepared for facing crises like the pandemic. A lot has been done in Europe since the COVID happened. At the very beginning, we were not prepared, so we didn't really know what to do, how to do it. No country in the world was prepared for this crisis. A few countries responded more rapidly than the European Union. Like I said, at the very beginning, we didn't quite know what to do, but today the situation is significantly different. We have reached a timely agreement on the recovery plan. This is a huge success of all those who were present at the summit those 4 days in July. I would like to extend my gratitude to the European Commission, who at the very outset loosened up some of the limitations that were related to the use of instruments that can help us respond to the crisis. Because of that, we did not witness a significant drop of some standards like we witnessed them during the financial crisis in 2009. I believe that recovery will be, because of it, easier. The European Union is also one of the leading countries when it comes to the development and the export of vaccines. The European vaccination strategy is working. What we need to do right now, what we are currently facing, is no longer dependent on the European Commission or the European Parliament or the national governments. Every individual has to do his or her task. We have vaccines. So, dear Europeans, it's up to us to use the vaccines and put an end to the pandemic. We are in a position where we can help others. The European Union is the most generous donor of vaccines. We have shown solidarity. Over 100 million doses have been given to less developed countries, and we can strengthen this strength further. During the crisis, we have learned some of the very important lessons. Lessons learned, like the Commission wrote in its paper. Let me just mention a couple of these lessons. We definitely need a common European plan to combat crises like COVID. We need a common plan for situations when crisis like this crops up, when the crisis or a threat is symmetric and affects everybody. But we also need plans when we are facing asymmetric crises that affect some countries, and other countries can help those that were most affected by it. We need to know, of course, what we can do together when we can do it. Like we saw last year, national measures that are not part of common plans, because these common plans do not exist, can impact other member states as well and the internal market. And the four freedoms are very much vulnerable during crisis. We have witnessed that. If you think back to the lines of lorries and trucks we saw in Europe. This crisis exposed our vulnerability as well, our dependence on some third countries when it comes to key strategic materials. For example, personal protection equipment, critical medical equipment, medicines, or components for medicines. Last but not least, we had to acquire materials to produce vaccines. So our goal should be that these ad hoc solutions that were used during the crisis, we learned a lot by doing that. These ad hoc measures need to be replaced by permanent, structured solutions and plans that need to be prepared in advance. So we intend to focus more in the future on the European Health Union. A lot of work has already been done in that respect, and I believe that there is consensus, or at least a high level of agreement between member states and the European institutions as to which steps need to be taken in order for us to build the health union. Recent events in the US and Ireland also demonstrated that we can expect to face situations such as cyber attacks. But consequences of such attacks can be much more impactful if the attacks happen on our energy networks or other infrastructure. So we need to do more in that respect. The European Union is here also in order for us to be able to respond to symmetric or asymmetric threats. No member state alone, not even the biggest ones, are not strong enough to respond to such threats. We have a common energy network and many other common infrastructures. So only a common plan and common capacities and capabilities enable us to defend ourselves successfully. There are two sources of threats that no single European country has been able to respond alone. In our national recovery plans, all member states have committed that a lot of investment will go into the digital and green transition. When we are talking about digitalization and the digital transition, we are facing numerous challenges. In many respects, we are trying to keep up the pace with other important actors in the world. A couple of examples, for example, in European Union, we have, for example, excellent companies that produce the best equipment for photolithography. That's the key technology to produce semiconductors. However, we assemble and produce less than 1% of the global production of semiconductors. What is more, in Europe, we have many prestigious universities and cutting-edge technological laboratories. However, we only design 1% of semiconductors that come to the global market. So we have the know-how, we have the capacities. We now need to take advantage of that. We need to make a decision as to where is this line dividing economic cooperation on the one hand and the European autonomy related to critical infrastructure and critical products on the other hand. Fact is that the European Union has to become as autonomous as possible. On the other hand, when we are talking about digitalization, we want to function in line with our European values. That is the right to privacy, personal data protection. These values do not have such an echo in some countries that are competitors of the European Union. Regulating the digital area, regulating the artificial intelligence and data management therefore represent a much higher challenge for us in the EU than to other actors outside of the EU. And these are the topics where we will be trying to reach a balance between competitiveness on the one hand and the respect of the European values on the other hand. If within our internal discussions we manage to find the right balance, then I believe that the European Union can assume a leading role when it comes to defining digital standards at the global level. I think this will be our next great challenge. In December of last year, we have set a very ambitious goal, that is to reduce by 55% the emissions by 2030. This target is intended to encourage other countries in the world to follow our example. But we are not talking only about ambitions in this respect. What we are also talking about is the question, how can we, these standards that are necessary to reach our goals, become adopted outside of Europe? I believe that over 90% of CO2 emission is produced outside of Europe. So we can be a leading actor at the global level, but we cannot reach this target alone. We also have to make sure that individual parts of Europe will not pay a too high a price because of this transition. We should be careful that we don't destroy the European industry because of it. And what worries our citizens most of all is that the prices of electricity and fuels will not increase dramatically and thus have a negative impact on the quality of life. The European Commission will put forward an important legislative package next week, Fit for 55. That's very important for the climate. We expect that the proposal will be fair and balanced. Therefore, we hope that the agreement on how to translate these ambitious goals into a binding legislation be reached as soon as possible. I believe this would be a good basis for the functioning of the European Union in the international arena, especially at the climate negotiations that will take place this year in November in Glasgow. The European Union of the European values, rule of law and equal criteria for all. The European way of life is self-evident for Europeans, but this is not really the case because social market economy is a European invention. Elsewhere in the world, these issues, economic and social relations, are regulated slightly or considerably different than in Europe. Many envy us for the solutions that we came up with when we're talking about the European legislation in the area of minimal wage, on cross-border transfer of social security rights. We have to keep this in mind. We have the European model of sport that is not based on elitism or exclusion, but on the same equal opportunities for all. Sport helps us in connecting local communities. It conveys a sense of belonging. And at the very heart of the European way of life are some of our common European values. That's dignity of every individual. And from that stems the inalienable human rights and fundamental political freedoms. Respecting the rule of law based on the same criteria is of key importance if we want the citizens to trust the public institutions. That's a key condition if we want to establish mutual trust between member states. When it comes to the issues of the rule of law, we have to understand that if we are talking about the rule of law, the independent justice system has to decide what is right and what is wrong, not a political body. The quality of the judiciary is also very important. The judicial system has to be based on an independent, impartial, and indiscriminate judiciary. In every member state, the justice system has to focus on providing justice, legal protection without delay, and without unreasonably long deadlines. Justice delayed is justice denied. Special attention will be paid to media freedom and media pluralism. We will be fighting fake news. I believe this fight against fake news is especially relevant when we are dealing with media monopolies that are present in the European Union as well. We would like to point out the resolution of the Council of Europe of the Parliamentary Assembly number 1096 and the resolution of the European Parliament on the European conscience and totalitarianism. The guidance and warnings from these two documents are very important when it comes to the development of resilient, vital democracies of lasting value, and especially when it comes to the implementation of the historical goal that is a complete and free Europe. Some democracies have still not implemented these issues in practice. I think that this is where deeper reasons for mutual misunderstandings about the rule of law in member states of the EU are coming from. Many people are not ready or capable to see cases where standards and guarantees of the rule of law do not protect the European values from Article 2 of the EU Treaty. Quite the contrary. The institutions of the rule of law that transitioned to democracy and only formally assumed the new roles but had not internalized them are there to protect the unjustified privileges and to maintain the culture of functioning that was established during the decades of non-democratic systems and practices. And this is something that then narrows the area of freedom and maintains the deep-seated inequalities and injustices. These questions will be discussed at the international conference that will be organized in Slovenia on the European Day of Remembrance of the Victims of Totalitarian Regimes on the 23rd of August. Our common responsibility and permanent task is to keep the memory alive of the consciousness on the necessity of European integration processes. This consciousness was born out of the extremely difficult and non-democratic historical trials of the 20th century that befell and marked the nations of today's members of the EU, even though we were not all affected in the same way, in the same extent, and for the same period of time. A credible and safe Europe has to be capable of providing security and stability in its neighborhood as well. We believe it is time for the European Union to become more strategic in its thinking and actions, especially at a global level, and this applies in particular to our immediate neighborhood. Slovenia, as the country currently at the helm of the European Union, will focus on the cooperation between the European Union and the Western Balkans. We will be also focusing on the Eastern neighborhood. When we are talking about the Western Balkans, that is a very important region for the European Union. Therefore, together with the President of the European Council, we will organize a summit EU Western Balkans in October in Slovenia. The EU enlargement is, in our opinion, a logical response to strategic goals that we are facing. And these challenges are present in the Western Balkans and in the Eastern neighborhood. Slovenia knows from its own experience how important the European perspective is when it comes to the implementation of reforms in the accession negotiations. However, this perspective needs to be tangible, such that it can be believed in the lifetime of the current generation. Otherwise, it no longer serves as an incentive. And this tangibility has to be the source of political energy, of inspiration, of everything that we need in order to carry out the necessary reforms at the political level. And this tangibility has to be the source of energy and focus of the political consciousness of the citizens so that they too can offer support to the necessary reforms. Our goal is to reconfirm, to awaken and to invigorate the European perspective for the Western Balkan countries. This promise had been given at the summit in Thessaloniki in 2003. If we manage to achieve that, we will demonstrate that we are a strategic actor. If we are not capable on delivering on this, if we don't take a step forward in the Western Balkans, then these steps will be taken by somebody else, by somebody who has different interests and values. The issue of migration is closely linked to the Western Balkan regions because through it, one of the most important migration routes is crossing this area. I'm talking about illegal migration. This shall be a very demanding file on our tables. I think that we all agree that we have to cooperate with countries of origins, with countries of transit. In theory, we know what needs to be done. There are no differences between us when it comes to the belief that we have to strengthen control at the external border. We agree a bit less when it comes to some parts of this migration pact, for example, when it comes to the issue of relocation, solidarity and responsibility. We need to seek solutions that will be acceptable to all countries because only in this way can we make sure that the new system will be active in practice. Illegal migrations have significantly burdened the functioning of the Schengen area in the past years. Schengen is one of the major achievements of our integration processes. What we need to do, in our opinion, is that now that we are hopefully slowly returning to normalcy, we start talking about the potential of enlarging this area. This should be put on the agenda. All countries that fulfill the criteria should become members of the Schengen area. Croatia, Bulgaria, and Romania are, in our opinion, kept waiting for unnecessary reasons. And now, at the very end, a couple of sentences on the Conference on the Future of Europe. I am very glad that the debate on the organizational aspects of this conference has been concluded. Now it is time for us to focus on the substance. We need to hear the voices of the Europeans and listen to them. In spring of next year, we will be able to adopt conclusions. In that respect, I believe that we have a very good opportunity to have a good discussion. The Conference on the Future of Europe coincides with many other discussions on open questions or questions that had been reopened again. This year, during the Bled Strategic Forum, we will organize discussions on the future of the European Union. We will invite many guests from the institutions of the EU. We will invite national leaders, former leaders that participated in the discussion on the European Constitution, on the Lisbon Treaty. We will invite European think tanks, citizens, and all of the representatives of all political groups in this parliament are invited as well. There are many open questions that we need to focus on. For example, poor demographic trends of most European countries, different viewpoints as to the solutions to these issues. The European Union is also facing a low voter turnout when it comes to European elections. Other basic questions are also open. For example, European democracy, then this great divide between an average European and the EU institutions. The attempts of non-elected subjects to assume the role of subjects that had been elected by voters. Too much time has been wasted for political strife. We had not had enough time, because of it, to focus on serious discussions on strategic and developmental dilemmas. We are at the crossroads. We need responses, or at least we need discussions on foreign policy and security dilemmas. For example, how to strengthen the role of the European Union so that it is more capable to respond to the trends of globalization. When we were adopting the Lisbon Treaty, I signed that treaty in Lisbon. We said that with this treaty, the European Union will be able to steer globalization processes. But today we have to ask ourselves, are we really capable of doing that today? In which areas where we need to do more in order to be able to do that? then we need to find consensus on the enlargement to the Western Balkans and the Eastern neighborhood. Will this be a strategic response to strategic challenges? How to reach consensus on that? Then we need to ask ourselves, are there any viable alternatives to a more intense security and military engagement of the European Union in the Sahel region? Terrorism is preventing the implementation of the most basic humanitarian, educational, and developmental projects in this area, and this threat of terrorism is spreading. How to define the long-term relationships between the European Union and the Russian Federation, between the European Union and Turkey? Turkey is becoming one of the most important actors in the Mediterranean. Then, where is this dividing line between economic and trade relations between the EU and China and the necessary strategic autonomy of the EU? How can we strengthen relations with India in all respects, because India is the most populous democracy on this planet? We also need a very frank discussion regarding our responsibility for the victims and for the sufferings that was all caused because we withdrew from Afghanistan, for example. The Taliban have now taken over then. We should focus not only on actions that just demolish something, but we should focus on actions that will contribute to setting up something new, better, permanent. We need to sober up and realize that a good, large, indispensable soft power in the EU is not enough. We need to be able to provide fundamental security and basic human rights. If the EU wants to become first a regional and then an equal global force, it needs a combination of soft and hard power. Distinguished members of the Parliament, when it comes to our short-term future, I believe that the most important thing is for us to stop the pandemics. We have to make sure that the recovery happens as soon as possible. We have to focus on green and digital transition. If we want to establish a good future for our generation and for future generations, what is of the utmost importance is to have a frank discussion on open strategic dilemmas. We have to find a common solution that will enable us to move forward. Thank you.